Greetings everyone and welcome back to Introduction to Programming. So before we start out, like usual, we're gonna look up a puzzle, and here is our puzzle for today. So I want you guys to think about it, and then you pause the video, and then when you think of an answer, you can compare it to the solution, and I'll be showing the solution in 3, 2, 1. Here we go. As always, pause the solution if you want to see it, and then I'm just gonna keep going to start the lecture. So for now, we're gonna talk about platforms. The programs you're gonna be using for coding. Depending on which programming language you want to learn, you may use a different one. I'll be using Microsoft Visual Studio, and that's for C#. And I believe you can code C++ as well, but I could be wrong. And I just like Microsoft Visual Studio because you can get it for free, and a lot of professional people use it. And so I'll be using this one. If you want, you could use other programs like Bloodshed Dev, which is for C++, or you can use IntelliJ, which is used for Java, or you can use Linux. Just do whatever you feel like. If you want to follow me, however, I'll be using this. So let's start a new project. We're gonna choose a console application. This will basically just be displaying a simple message. Simple input, simple output. Just a console. The same thing that you get when you run certain programs. And so let's just call it simple input and output, and let's go. And while it loads, and here we go. So the first lesson we have for platforms is that typically after you write any code, you're gonna need to check if that code has any errors, and you're gonna need to bring it all together, if that makes sense. And so depending on which platform you're going to use, it's either going to be called build, or it's going to be called make if you're using Linux, or it's going to be called compile in some cases. Basically, this reads the code that you have. It checks for errors, and it tells you if there are any errors. As you can see, I didn't write anything else. I didn't write anything yet, so obviously there will be no errors. But if I wrote like like right here, if I wrote an error and I try to compile, it's gonna tell me that there are problems right here. And so let me finish this. Let me bring this back. Okay, I don't know what happened, to be perfectly honest, but here. Anyway, here we go. So the other thing is, after you compile the code, you need to run it, which will basically be this button right here in Visual Studio. In other platforms, it's typically going to have this triangle, but if you don't see it, it's probably going to be something like run, like I think it's run usual, or start. So anyway, let's start coding. And so we're going to write a simple code. As I said before, typically all programs are going to have some sort of input and some sort of output. And so our code that we're going to start up with, we're just going to write a simple code that just displays a message. The moment you open it, it's going to display a message. And so let's just say, let's write this, and then I'm going to explain it after I write it. Console.writeLine, and then message. So this is the first thing that you're gonna learn about every single programming language, is that how you display the output. In C#, it's just you writing console and then .writeLine, and then you have the message in here, and you need to make sure it's inside quotations. If you don't write the message, then if you don't write it in quotations, then he's gonna look for a variable instead, which we're gonna talk about in about a minute. And also you need to make sure you have a semicolon. If I remove the semicolon, we're going to be getting an error right here. The reason why you need to write a semicolon at the end of every sentence is that the way the computer reads code is that he divides the sentence into steps, as we said before. And the semicolon is your way of telling him that, this step is over, and then you can proceed along. If you don't write a semicolon, then he's gonna start reading it all as a big chunk, and then he's gonna get confused, and then you won't be able to run any code. Now, in here, you just write whatever message you want, but instead, let me just write hello user. Now, if I save and then build and then run this, oh, that was too fast, you couldn't see it. Whenever you have that problem, just write console to read line or whatever command you use to read input, and that's gonna prevent the screen from going away. So let me start comparing real quick. So we said that for C# console to write line is what you use to display the output. If you're using Java, you're gonna instead write system.out.println, and then once again brackets, and then message, and then semicolon. And then if you're using regular C, you're gonna write C out, and then you're gonna say your message, and then semicolon. So depending on which programming language you're going to be using, you're going to need to learn what's the best way to print, which you could look it up online. Typically, one of the websites I like to use is Stack Overflow, and it's spelled like that. But for now, like if all you care about is learning C# from now, that's the one we'll be using. And then similarly, console to read line is what you use to read input. It's simple, just take write line and type read instead of write. And then depending on other languages, it may be like in C it will be cin, and then just reverse the sign, and so forth. I need to review other programming languages, to be fair. So anyway, for now, so we wrote a simple code that just displays this message right here. And it's gonna say hello user. So what happens if we don't use the quotation marks is that now he's gonna be confused. And the reason why he'll be confused is that if you don't use his quotation marks, he's gonna be looking for a variable instead, which is actually gonna be our segue for the next part. For variables, more simply, basically in programming, the way you program is that you make variables, and then you store data inside of them, and then whenever you want that data, you just call back the variable to get the data from inside of it. And depending on which type of data you need, you're gonna need different types of variables. So let's start with our first basic type, which is int. So int is short for integer. And as a lot of you guys know from algebra, it's just simply numbers that don't have a decimal, like any whole number, 1, 2, 3, 1,000, any big number as long as it doesn't have a decimal. And so for here, we have wrote int. Now, remember in algebra when we when we typically say something like x is equal to 5, well, that's basically how programming works. And so we're just gonna say int x. So we need a variable that's type int, and it's called x, and then we're gonna store inside of it the number 5. Now, the equal sign in programming is not just saying equal. It's more or less just taking whatever's on the right, and then whatever value is on the right, and then setting it inside of the variable on the left. And this is important to know because when we're not talking about numbers, we're going to be talking about other types as well. And if you think of equal the same way you think of it in real life, it could be a little confusing. And so basically, just think of it as whatever's on the right, we set the variable on the left equal to that. And as we said before, put a semicolon at the end of every sentence, because that's how you tell the computer that, okay, this line is over. And so we have our first type right here, which is integer x. And so let's say we want to display that data. We're gonna say console.writeLine, and then let's display our message. We're gonna say you picked a number. Now the good thing is if you don't write the quotation marks, you can display the variable right away, you know, whatever is stored inside of it. And so I'm just gonna type x, you know, just the variable x. And then if we run the code, it's gonna tell us, as you guys will see right here, it's gonna tell us you picked the number and the number is 5. Now what if we write 5.5, you know, like a decimal? Well, obviously we're gonna get an error. And depending on which platform you'll be using, sometimes it may not give you an error. However, it will display the number without the decimal. So like if I wrote x in here and I wrote 5.5, he will just ignore this completely and just display 5. And so we don't want that. You know, some cases we will be needing to write decimals. Well, then that's where double comes in. Double is basically a decimal, you know, just a simple decimal. So if we say double x equal 5.5, we no longer get an error. And then there are other types of numbers. You know, there is float, there is long, you know, depending on how big the decimal you want to be. If you want, you could just look them up in tables, you know, to know the details. I typically like to use double and float. The thing to note about float, however, is that whatever number you write, you need to write f next to it, which is short for float. If you don't write f, you're gonna get an error. So we have our double number right here, which is 5.5. Let's see if he can display it, and the answer is yes, he can display 5.5. So for now, these are the types of numbers we're gonna be talking about. You know, this is just simple decimal. Let's talk about other types. So other than numbers, you know, what other displays you guys expect to see? Well, we expect to see some, you know, string, some messages. And so let me delete this for a while. Let's just say, okay, we're gonna type char, and then we're gonna type, let's say x. Now char is basically short for character, and it's basically letters, a single letter, and we can store it inside of it. So let's say we want to enter the letter y, where here we go, we've stored the letter y inside of the character x. And so when we call the letter x, he's gonna display whatever we wrote. So let me delete this for a second. And here we go, we have the letter y. Now you can store numbers as well. So as you can see right here, you know, char is pretty much any character that you expect to see, and he's gonna write it. And as you can see right here, when we're printing characters, we don't need to write the quotation marks, because now we're just calling the variable. And remember, whenever we call a variable, we don't need the quotation marks inside of here. And so our next type we're gonna learn is, what if you want to write multiple letters, you know, not just a single one. Basically, so we said that character is what you use to store a single digit, a single letter or character. And so we're gonna display we're gonna store the letter y. Now, the first thing I want you guys to notice is that we use single colons. We don't use double, like double quotation marks, like we use with messages. And this is important because that's how you tell the difference between multiple letters and just one letter. And so if we wanted to write multiple letters, we're gonna be using string, which is this guy right here. And we're gonna make a variable called y, and we're gonna call it string. And let's say we're gonna store the sentence name. And so if we write y in here, and we're gonna display, as you may expect, it's gonna just write the sentence name, or the word, you know, name. Now the reason why we write single colon as opposed to two, single quotation mark, I mean, as opposed to two, is that what if we wanted to write a sentence that only has one letter, like n? You know, then when we type it, he's just gonna write n. And so basically, this is just the way of us of telling the computer that expect either one letter or expect like multiple. And so this is very important to understand. So remember, character, just one single quotation mark. If it's string, it's a double quotation marks. And so now we've learned basically the letters type. Let me introduce one last type, and then we're gonna write like a very simple code, and then we're gonna call it a day. And so our last type is called bool. Basically, the best way to think of bool is that basically think of it as a checkbox. You know, let's say something that sometimes will be true and sometimes will be false, and depending on what is stored inside the variable, we may want to display either true or false. In some programming languages, it would just be a simple 1 or 0, where 1 means true and 0 means false. In here, however, in C#, we just write true or false, you know, whatever we want. So if I type in X in here and, you know, build and run, it's gonna say true or false, whatever we wrote inside of it. And again, this will be very useful later down the line. And those are basically the basic variable types that you're gonna need to know. And so let's just type a really quick code that will show that will collect everything we wrote so far. And so let's just say, all right. So the first thing we're gonna do is, let's say, start by writing some sort of opening, and it's gonna be a greeting. Let's just say, hello user, please enter your name. And so we're gonna use string, and then let's just say name, which will be our variable name, excuse me, and then we're gonna store whatever the user enters, which will be console.readline, sorry. Remember, read line is for input, write line is for output. And then we're just gonna say console.writeLine, and then we're gonna greet the user based on the name that he entered. So we'll say hello, and then semicolon, space, and then, so remember, as I said before, double quotation marks is for a message. And then if you want to write a message next to a variable, all you need to do is just put plus and then put the value, the variable name. The way this will happen is that now he's gonna display the message hello, and then whatever else was stored inside of name. And as you guys will see right here, he's gonna ask me for a name. Let's just say Sam, and then he's gonna say hello Sam. And whatever name we're gonna write else, he's gonna do it as well. You know, what if we said Mike? He's gonna say hello Mike. And basically the last thing I'll say is that make sure to count for the space, because this is how you tell the program that this words and this word are separate. They have like a space in between. If you delete the space right here, he's just gonna display it without the space. And here we go. We have a very simple code that just reads the name and displays it. I hope you guys found this lecture useful. And so I hope if you guys enjoyed it, please comment, tell us your opinion. If you have any criticism, please type it as well. And we're just gonna call it a day. We'll see you later in the next episode, where we're gonna start talking about the bigger codes, and maybe we'll delve into conditions. Alright guys, we'll catch you later.